Alcuin is working on his school, teaching the noblemen who served under Charlemagne how to read and write, so he won't have to depend on all those priests, although he still does have to depend on them mostly. Meanwhile, trouble in paradise. the popes have gone on being popes in the peninsula, what we call the Italian peninsula, but the popes are not in total control down there because there is another group of these barbarians who came in from the east called the Lombards. Some of the Lombards are Roman Christians, some of them are Arian Christians, but in any case, they want to have control in the Italian peninsula. They don't, and Pope Leo is kind of being besieged by them, and he sends to Charlemagne and says, "Help! You got to come help me get rid of the Lombards." So Charlemagne comes down to the Italian peninsula, helps Pope Leo get control, and while he is down there, he attends church services on Christmas Day 800. And while he is kneeling at the altar, Pope Leo sneaks up behind him and puts a crown on his head and says, "Okay, you are now the Roman emperor. You are the successor to the Roman emperors of the empire." And interestingly enough, there are some reports of this event that indicate that Charlemagne was not happy about this not because he didn't want to be emperor, he already thought he was an emperor, and he didn't think that a pope should be in a position to make him emperor. For a pope to say that the pope had made Charlemagne the emperor indicates that the pope thought he was more powerful than the emperor was. Because if somebody makes you an emperor, they have the power to make anybody an emperor. And Charlemagne did not want to hear this. Charlemagne thought he was an emperor in his own right. The complications don't go on during Charlemagne's lifetime, but it's an indication of what is to come, because as we go into the 10th and 11th and 12th centuries, there are going to be situations where the king and the pope are fighting it out. Various kings are emperors on one side and the pope on the other, and the pope wants to say that he is the most important person, as Gregory the Great had wanted to be in Europe, and the kings and emperors aren't putting up with this. However, that's a couple of centuries in the future. In the meanwhile, unfortunately, Charlemagne has the not very bright idea of dividing his kingdom between his sons, which means that after Charlemagne dies, the empire starts breaking up into parts, and his attempt to reconstruct or recreate the Roman Empire doesn't continue. It doesn't last, and the Carolingian Renaissance doesn't last. During most of this period that we refer to as the Dark Ages, there are, instead of being a big area which is controlled by a single centralized government, there are lots of little areas. And each area is controlled by a lord, a dominus. And that lord has people who are basically his servants who are working the land for him. This is what you call the manorial system. You sometimes hear people referred to as the lord of the manor, in the sense of there being this kind of in a position of control. And the lord was the guy who owned and didn't operate, but was in charge of an area called the manor. And now the idea of the manorial system, as I describe it up here, involved several related concepts. One of them was this idea that you have instead of just having every field that is sort of plowed according to the discretion of the person who's doing the agricultural labor, you have the synchronization of various areas of the manor in what is called the three-field system. You probably all know that in agriculture, if you keep growing the same crop over and over again on a particular piece of land, that land will become quickly exhausted. This is something that happened in the South before the Civil War, because both tobacco and cotton, which were grown in the South, are very demanding crops. A piece of land that's being used to grow tobacco over and over again every year is going to become exhausted, so that will not eventually be able to grow good tobacco. So the secret to keep that from happening was crop rotation, which is basically what the three-field system is all about. In a particular manner, you might have the crops, and this is sort of schematic because the particular areas that were being farmed in different ways every year were not necessarily next to each other. But you would have a third of your land that was used to grow wheat, which is what they call a summer crop. Another third of the land would be used to grow barley, which is a winter crop. So they are being harvested at different times, and they also make different demands, different nutritional demands on the land. And then the third area would be, you wouldn't be growing anything on that land. It would be allowed to lie fallow, as they say. So only in terms of each piece of land, for instance, a piece of land would only be, are we having trouble again? Stalling? Let's do this. Why is